Good morning, welcome, and welcome back to the Europasaal for day 2 of the 2023 Berlin Energy Transition Dialogue. My name is Jennifer Porto. I'm the moderator here in the Europasaal. I'm really excited to be back for day 2. I'm really excited to have these 6 individuals and 2 more individuals who will be joining us. More about that in just a second. Today's panel is called Youth and Community Involvement, Pooling Knowledge for a Just Energy Transition. We want to look at how we can pool knowledge and how we can share knowledge across generations, across communities for a proper just transition. As we heard this morning from the president of COP28, no one can be on the sidelines, no one can be left behind. We've also heard that phrase, a just transition, a few times already at this year's BETD. And in this session, we're going to do a deeper dive, talking with activists, with ministers, with industry leaders, and we're going to be doing it like no other session at the BETD. Now, what does that mean? So this session is designed as a front row participants event. This means some of our panelists up here will stay here for the whole hour, but around a half an hour in, we will invite 2 speakers from our front row to join us. And I'll let you know when that will happen. This change in lineup will also mean an opportunity for a change in a new direction. Audience members, if we have time, I would love to invite you as well to ask questions of our panelists, whether they're the panelists on stage or the panelists who have taken their place in the front row. We do have quite a lineup for today's first panel here in the Europasaal, and I'd like to introduce them to you. Seated just to my left, Artane Rizvanoli, the Minister of Economy for the Republic of Kosovo, Mitzi Jonel-Tan, an international spokesperson and convener of the Youth Advocates for Climate Action Philippines. You just gave a keynote. It's fantastic that you made your way from the Weltsaal over here. Thank you so much. Rana Adib, Executive Director of REN 21. Elizabeth Wathuti, a climate activist from Kenya. Christina Simone Techa, the Desk Officer of the Global Plan of Action for Sustainable Energy in Displacement Settings Peacekeeping Training Program at the Division for Peace at the United Nations Institute of Training and Research, and Saga Williams, the Senior Advisor, External Relations for the First Nations Major Projects Coalition. Joining in later will be Lisipriya Kangujam, a climate activist from India, who was a young keynote speaker yesterday, and Nugzar Kandrava, the Director of Project Management for the Department of the Energy Development Fund in Georgia. Thank you all so much for joining me today. Because we have 8 of you, I want to get right to our questions. I'll start with you, Minister. The draft energy strategy 2022-31 that was adopted last year by Kosovo's government seeks to promote the expansion of renewable energy sources. It also includes provisions to help the population be more active and become prosumers. Now, according to statistics, Kosovo has the youngest population in Europe. I think that around 65% of the population is under the age of 25. My first question is, did you include the youth in this process? And no matter how you answer that question, do you think that this energy strategy encourages more democratic participation in the energy sector and decentralized access? Minister?
Thanks so much. It's particularly great for me to be here today because, first, as you said, Kosovo is the youngest country in Europe. Also, being a relatively young minister in a generally young government, younger than average, I would like to think that we have some of this youth element also in this policy-making process just by being younger. In our energy strategy, we thought that it's extremely important to have a participatory process and for there to be consensus. And I'm saying something which sounds like a cliche here. However, if you think about it in the context of Kosovo particularly, we are the 3rd country in Europe with the highest reserves of lignite. And we've relied on coal for such a long time that for most people, particularly older generations, it can be unimaginable to move out of coal and not to use these natural resources that we have. So in order to make sure that we have a transition, we need to make sure that everyone is on board, that everyone is not only informed but fully believes that we need to make changes for the next generations, which is another reason why I'm particularly happy to be here, because in energy, we are really never making decisions for today, or very rarely so. We are making decisions for the next generation, therefore making sure that they are informed and participate in the process is extremely important. What we tried to do, what we did, is we made sure it was quite a long process actually, and one of the key reasons for that, because it was a participatory process. We had many workshops for around 1 year, where civil society organizations, other stakeholders were included. At the end, when we had public consultations, I personally visited the 7 regions in Kosovo, had discussions with citizens and local representatives, many of them youth. And we've also tried to interact with youth on social media, particularly on issues that were burning issues, either in crisis management or in regarding the energy strategy. Whenever we would see that something is particularly interesting for youth, we try to respond on those questions and engage them into the debate, which was very useful. And of course, we do take on board, it's very useful to see what they think. And it's actually often very surprising to see how informed and interested they are. We also had a campaign, energy saving campaign, in primary schools all over the country. And we had great discussions with the kids. We were sharing advice with them, but they were sharing also advice with us, sharing their experience, what they do in their family, in their school, to save energy, how they affect their whole families by what they learn at school, and how they give advice to their siblings. Which it was really great and one of the most rewarding experiences as a minister, actually. It's not something that we get to do often, but one of the things that I really enjoyed. In our energy strategy, we want to make sure that citizens are active participants, not only by being producers of energy and consumers, being prosumers, not only by being more aware about what choices they make, but also by making sure that no one is left behind in this transition. A particular section in the strategy is dedicated to schemes for vulnerable consumers, who, first of all, should be informed about their choices they make, but also, more importantly, enabled to make these choices. They are enabled. We want to make sure that everyone is enabled to live in efficient homes that are comfortable enough and warm enough during winter and cool enough during summer, and that they are able to afford this and spend as little on energy, and therefore also reduce energy poverty, which is currently a problem in our country.
I think we're going to come back in the second question and talk a little about this more. I'd like to move on now to Mitzi Junel Tan from the Philippines. And yours is really a strong voice, and I have to say it was really fantastic to listen to your speech this morning. You talked about anti-imperialism, you talked about anti-colonialism, intersectionality, and in your work, you also focus on amplifying voices from the global south. How would you envisage a global and just energy transition? And I have a second part to that, and I know it's hard because I have to ask you to limit to 3 minutes. But as a climate activist in the Philippines, do you see a distributional aspect of climate change and the global energy system?
So we can see that the way that the climate crisis impacts people is not the same across the world. And I don't know if this is going to be controversial as a climate activist, but I don't think climate change is the biggest problem that we have on this planet, but rather it is the problem that will amplify all other problems that we're already experiencing. And that is why there is no equal distribution of how people are affected by the climate crisis. Those with more economic privilege, those that have like gender privilege. So when you have to experience gender injustice, racial injustice, economic marginalization, these all amplify the impacts of the climate crisis for you. As a very concrete example, Typhoon Yolanda or Typhoon Haiyan, known internationally in 2013, hit the Philippines. And months after the typhoon left, young girls and women were forced into prostitution because there was no other form of work. There was nothing else that they could do. And so there you see the class crisis and gender crisis interplaying with the climate crisis. And how do we fix this? how do we have that just transition, as you were asking? It all starts with that political will, with international collaboration, with phasing out fossil fuels. So countries like Germany, countries in the global north, are already capable of doing that. In the Philippines, we do need to stay with fossil fuels for a little bit longer, but we also need to make sure that when we transition into renewable energy, part of reparations isn't just climate finance, but also technology transfer. Lest what will happen is that we have to go into debt to buy the renewable energy technology to be used in our countries. That's not how we approach a global just transition. We need to make sure that when countries in the global north transition into renewable energies, they also make that technology available to countries in the global south. Because where do the minerals for those renewable energy systems come from? From our countries. It comes from us, but we are not able to produce it and to industrialize it ourselves because it's exported to countries in the global north. So we have to understand that it is this global systemic problem that we need to solve. And when we're talking about just transition, we also need to remember the workers. That when we phase out fossil fuels, we cannot leave behind the workers of the fossil fuel industries. Because they're not the ones who caused the climate crisis, so they shouldn't be the ones who have to suffer these consequences. It is possible. It sounds like such a big ask, but it's not. It's as simple as caring for the people around you, caring for people across the world. And once you remember that, and you stop, not us really, but really when policymakers and world leaders stop prioritizing profit over and over and over, then we can have a discussion and a dialogue that truly talks about a global just transition.
I'm really happy that you brought up the workers. I can do a bit of advertising for the panel that's going to happen next. We're going to be looking at making sure that we include workers in this just transition. Rana, I'd like to turn to you now, Executive Director of REN21. According to the website of REN21, you are the only global renewable energy community of actors from science, governments, NGOs, and industry. So your goal is to inform both policymakers and the broader public on trends and potential opportunities in the renewable energy sector, looking at what a renewable future might look like. How would you describe the current trends, though, in the global energy transition? I mean, we're talking about a just transition. Is this a just transition?
So maybe before speaking about the just transition, I would like, why are we the only global community for renewable energy, a multi-stakeholder community? Is because our governance really allows the stakeholders from industry, governments, research, science and academia, and NGOs to participate and sit at the board, at the table of a board. And I think this is something that is really fundamental because governance is basically a real big question on all the topics we already heard about. So I think it is also for all of us a responsibility to explore more of those governance models. And let's be honest, as a multi-stakeholder policy network, it's quite messy. We're not used to this. We're used to speak a sectoral voice, an expert voice. It means listening to each other differently. It means developing knowledge and data that is being not only crowdsourced, but also owned. It means basically developing the Esperanto for renewable energy and for the transition. Now, I'm going to come to the just energy transition. I think before speaking about the transition here, it's important to underline that renewable energy and a renewable energy-based system and economy and society is actually much more just, fairer, equitable, and environmentally sustainable than a fossil fuel-based one. And I think that is something that is really important because there is very often this focus of how do we move away from fossil fuel in a just way to renewable energy. I think it's fundamentally important to underline that the value of renewable, the positive value, the social, the environmental, and the economic is already there and better than what we have in place. Now, how do we make this happen? And I think this is basically a part where it is really important, and what REN21 offers and can offer as a global community is basically a platform for all those. We have a community of more than 4,000 experts, change makers globally. And what is important is all these players are doing amazing things. The solutions are there. There's a lot of experiences, and we heard it already here on the panel. We heard it during the days. And these voices need to be amplified and really have a seat around the table when it comes down to global debates, global policy making, defining basically the World Trade Organization rule, the International Monetary Fund rules, because here is an order that is implemented, there is an institutional pattern that is implemented that is from the past and needs to adapt to a renewable-based system and to a fairer system. And I think this is basically where I really invite all of you to join the opportunity we can offer as this global community to share your voices, but contribute data, contribute knowledge, contribute the insights to basically develop this crowdsourced data that is showing what is working well and what is not working well. And I'll end on this part. What is working well? Great renewable energy uptake when we're looking to the power sector. But the overall system depends still on 80% of fossil fuel. That's a reality. The sectors, building, transport, industry and agriculture are fundamentally lagging behind, and they represent 80% of our energy consumption. So what is important here, and you spoke about the cross-sectoral part, is we do not only need ambition, goals, and investment going into roadmaps, political leadership, going into the supply side, but we also need to accompany the fossil fuel-based energy-consuming sectors to move out of fossil fuel. And this means roadmaps, it means targets, and unfortunately we heard, like here in Germany, that, those targets have been, the sectoral targets have been killed over, I think, yesterday. And I think this is really a learning, and where your voices are important, the sectoral voices are important to ask for it, because renewable energy today is more affordable, and it's an economic story, it's an energy security story, and then it's a climate story too.
This is something that I definitely want to come back to later in the panel, but now I'd like to move on to our next panelist. Elizabeth Wathuti, you're from Kenya, an activist. You're also the founder of the Green Generation Initiative, which works on educating children and young people to care for nature and live, and to encourage them to live more sustainably. You're determined to empower communities, especially children and young people, and you want to find solutions to the climate and ecological crisis. In the work that you've done, we're here to pool knowledge. What are some of the best practices, the recommendations that you can give to the rest of us?
One thing that I have understood through the work that we do at the Green Generation Initiative, and one thing that we must embrace, is the fact that the environment and the climate are not separate from human affairs. And it's an understanding that our survival, health, and well-being is very much dependent on the survival, health, and well-being of our planet and everything that is surrounding us. And with the work that we do, we've tried to bring and sort of build these connections, an understanding that we are in an interconnected crisis, food crisis, nature crisis, climate crisis, energy crisis. And all these crises, all these challenges have similar drivers and similar solutions. And so with the work that we do, we are also empowering and teaching children to clean their own air, grow their own food, and also implement locally led climate solutions with an understanding that that is how they also grow bolder and change their surroundings, their communities, and even beyond their country's borders. And we have understood that if we create these environments for them that allow them to thrive, that allow them to survive, that allow them to understand that they have a voice to fight for what is going to create their future, for us, that is one of the most important things. And so one of the things we're doing in terms of the food crisis is trying to create food forests in schools across Kenya, trying to get the children to pick designated compounds in their schools, and there they plant mixed species of fruit trees that also encourage them to grow their own food at the same time. But we've also understood that there is a lot of energy that is used in some of these schools because they are overpopulated, they have to cook for their children, and along the way being able to identify challenges and finding solutions, because one of the best practices we have to do, we always have to make sure that we give communities an alternative solution. And as we continue to create these green spaces in the schools, and as we continue to encourage the children to grow their own food, we understand and we know that they have to also cook. So we also understand that these schools need to have access to clean energy. And at some point, I was giving a story of one of the schools that we worked with where we were able to create green spaces. We were able to have a green fence around the school, have a food forest around the corner, but about 3 years later, most of these trees had to be cut down for the schools to actually have access to biofuel to cook. And so we have to make sure that at the center of it all, that these communities that don't have access to energy, and even as we talk about a just transition, how is this just transition ensuring that access to energy to the millions of people who still don't have it is at the center of it all? So one of the things that we started to do is also making sure that these schools have access to biogas energy, and this is through biodigesters at the same time, because we understand that if they have access to biogas to cook for the children, then the trees and the food forest and the life-bearing fruits that they bear will continue to thrive and survive at the same time. So it's an understanding that all of these issues are very much connected. And then we also have to put communities at the center and at the heart of it all, because all of these solutions we talk about in the conferences, these are things that communities on the front line are driving every day, are leading every day. And it's just an understanding and asking ourselves, how do we scale some of these solutions that communities are already doing every day? Because as much as they are the most affected by the crisis, one of the things that communities have chosen not to do, they have chosen not to sit back, and they've chosen not to bear the fate at the end of it all. They've chosen to step up and find solutions within themselves, find ways to make sure that their children and their families have food and water. So for us, it's about how do we center these communities? How do we make sure that their needs, their present needs, and their solutions are at the center of every decision that is being made, and that they also have access to the resources they need. They have access to the technologies they need. They also have access to direct finance to be able to support these communities and to be able to support their solutions to scale at the end of the day. So for me, when it comes to even a just transition, it is at the heart of the communities, at the heart of the children, at the heart of the people that are bearing the biggest brunt of the climate crisis, despite having done the least to create it. So it is for us to make sure that all these issues are centered at it all. And communities know what works for them. Communities know what solutions are best for them. So they have so much to offer. They have so much solutions to offer. And we just have to make sure that they have an enabling environment. They have whatever it takes to be able to scale some of these solutions. And being able to link all these issues as well is something that I have seen in most of the forums where decisions are being made. We treat all these issues as though they were separate. And at the end of it all these issues are very much connected. If our environment is enabling us to continue to grow our own food, then it means people are going to be able to thrive. People are not going to have food insecurity issues. And just a good example right now.
I do want to say, because I want to make sure we have time to everyone else, I want to come back to this because I think you're absolutely right. I mean, we've heard it many times already. This isn't a one-size-fits-all solution, and we have to listen to people where they are. We have to go to people. Communities know best what works for them. And I want to come back to this. This is so important, but I also want to make sure this is another community that's really important. Christina Simone Teixeira, at UNITAR, you work on clean energy access in displacement settings, and this is a different type of community. And you also look at how to improve clean energy access to the most vulnerable. Access to energy in general, but especially access to clean energy in displacement settings, it's really important. It's indispensable. Can you give us a brief current state of affairs? And what are the effects of insufficient access to clean energy in these displacement settings?
Yes, and thank you very much for this question. And I'm super happy to be here today. And I have to say I'm so inspired by this panel and by the whole dialogue. And I'm very happy to talk a little bit about clean energy in displacement settings, because this is what we actually call like humanitarian energy, and not many people know much about it. We actually last year developed a new report on the state of humanitarian energy. So if you're interested, you can look on the GPA website, because there you will have like more detail that I won't be able to share like today with you. Yes, and you said like clean energy is indispensable. Like it really is. Like it is for us, but it is even more like for displaced people. And actually, you're asking me like how the situation like is at this moment in time, and I would say like the situation is quite marbled. Like on the one hand, we do see like some improvement. For example, if we think about accountability of institutions for energy provision, for example. you will see more projects like in displacement settings, focusing on energy for health, energy for cooking, energy for households. Also, we actually do see many like UN organizations, international organizations, looking at their own footprint and trying to like get on with their green shift. But I have to say, like, we are sadly like not there yet, and we have by no means like reached like the progress that we would want to reach until now. And I would really love to share like a couple of numbers just for you today, because I think they're quite shocking. Like an estimated like 94% of displaced people in camps do not have access to electricity, like 94. And 81% still rely on firewood and charcoal for cooking. Like, can you imagine what, like, the consequences, like, of these numbers? And actually, millions of people still, like, of displaced people, live in the complete darkness, surrounded by smoke, pollution, unable to access basic services or actually sustainable cooking solutions. And these basic services, actually, of electricity, I mean, for them means no, like, basic access to healthcare, education, as well as risks that are related to, like, gender-linked activities, like the firewood collection, etc. So actually, I mean, for these people, access to electricity means really much, much more than only switching on and off the light. And I have to say, I think with all the stakeholders that I've met here during these 2 days, we really have the means, like, to not leave them behind. So
we absolutely do have the means not to leave them behind, and thank you for saying that. I'd like to turn now to Saga Williams. You're a senior advisor in the First Nations Major Projects Coalition, and you've been involved in the successful implementation of a number of high-profile initiatives, including energy, mining, economic and policy development projects, and land claims settlements. In this capacity, did you witness any energy projects that breached the rights and territories of First Nations communities? And this is not an easy answer to give in a brief fashion, but I have to ask you to please be brief. Would you say Canada's energy system is a just one?
Thank you for this important question. I think the context of understanding the history of Indigenous peoples in Canada really would inform the answer. But first I want to say I'm very happy to be here. I want to acknowledge my ancestors and the future generations. As part of our teachings are that we look 7 generations ahead to when we make any decisions that would impact our future, our children, our children's children. So I'm really inspired that we have a panel here talking about youth involvement in climate change and in sustainable energy. When we talk about the history of Indigenous people's participation in resource development in our country, it's one that consistently consisted of breaches of our rights. We have constitutionally protected rights in Canada. Part of those are treaty rights, so those rights that were negotiated with the federal and provincial governments, but also Aboriginal rights, which stem from our inherent connection to our land base. And I think that we've moved and transitioned out of a stage of having to hold the levels of government accountable in terms of our participation in the resource sector. We've done that. It's not been an easy transition. Much like Mitzi mentioned, there's been a history of colonization that have impacted our people and our people's relationship with development that's happened in our country. And I think we're transitioning out of that, and there's been a number of court cases that have facilitated our participation and facilitated the acknowledgement that any resource development or any projects that are happening are happening on Indigenous held land. So in order for projects to move through an environmental regulatory process, First Nations and Inuit and Métis people have to be involved in that conversation, have to be involved in the discussion around how that development happens. And our participation and partnership is key in terms of ensuring that happens. And I want to say that in the context of the traditional knowledge that we hold, it's really important to bring that information into resource development, because we have very intimate knowledge, having lived off of the land since time immemorial, about how the river systems run, how the water bodies are, how they sustain life from a flora and fauna perspective. So our involvement is really key in terms of development, and it's key for the sustainability of Canada, which is a very resource-rich country.
Thank you so much. I love that you bring this up as well. My husband's a journalist, and he has just done a story about the importance of oral tradition in Indigenous communities and how important this is. And I love that you gesture towards the future and also gesture towards the past. And these voices are so important. Just because it's not written down doesn't mean it's not good knowledge to share. Thank you so much for mentioning that today. This is what we talked about earlier. Now it's time to have a shift in our panels. I'm so sorry that we have to say temporarily goodbye to two of our panelists. Thank you again to Mitzi Jonel-Tan and to Elizabeth Wathuti, who will now take their seats in the audience as I invite two new panelists to the stage. Joining us are Lisipriya Kangujam, a climate activist from India, and Nugzar Kandrava, the Director of Project Management, Department of the Energy Development Fund in Georgia. For the second part of the panel, we'll hear from our two new panelists first before we move to the other panelists in the group. And then, of course, I want to make sure, if we have time, if you have an audience question, again, you can direct it to someone here on stage, or you can direct it to one of the two panelists who has now taken seats in the front row. Our two new front row panelists, you're also welcome to ask questions of your fellow panelists up on stage, and I want to get right to it so that we can make sure to have enough time for everybody. Lisipriya Kangujam, you're one of the youngest climate activists in the world. And you're part of the Child Movement, a global movement for climate justice. You were also a key agent. I think your mic's already on. You were a key agent in the distribution of oxygen tanks to people who had COVID in India. You were really involved in community work. We've heard about the importance of communities and support of vulnerable people. And you were a part of creating a forum for exchange in a crisis, which COVID definitely was and still is. What kind of forums for exchange do you wish for when it comes to the design, implementation, and evaluation of energy projects?
Well, first of all, I would like to say that the climate change problem is not only for you or for me or for somebody else. Climate change problem is like for everybody living on this planet, in our Mother Earth. And also, you can just see in my country, India, in New Delhi, that how we are facing the air pollution crisis and the heat wave crisis in Delhi. Like in winter, we are facing severe heat wave crisis, and in summer actually, and in winter again, we face the air pollution crisis in India. So it's really the climate disasters that we are facing due to the past generations and that they have caused, and I want the rich country nations to pay for the loss and damage, actually the climate finance, to the global south, to the developing countries, to the poor vulnerable countries who are like facing all these global climate crises. And yeah, but our leaders are doing nothing. They are just blaming each other instead of finding a long-term solution, and they are just taking out temporary solutions like shutting down schools for 1 week, 1 day, 2 days, 3 days. But these are the temporary solutions. What we want is permanent solutions. And we already have the solutions by the scientists and the experts. What is left is the action. So what is needed is the action by our leaders and the people. So we need to collaborate with each other, and then we need to fight together. We need the climate action now. And also, the best gift parents can give to their children is not a beautiful house, expensive car, or a lot of money. The best gift parents can give to their children is a beautiful green planet. And to give this planet, we need to just transition away from coal, oil, and gas, which are the top causes of today's global climate crisis. And also, so that's why we are saying to the rich nations to pay for the loss and damage immediately. We need the money now for the loss and damage to the global south. So there will be no climate justice without climate finance.
I think that's exactly correct. And it's really inspiring to hear you talk, I think, about my son, who's younger than you. And I can't imagine him sitting on a stage like this. It's incredible the work that you do. And you kids like my son, I'm sure many of us here today have kids here. Thank you so much. And speaking of funding, because I think it's important, to our other new guests on stage, Nugzar Kandrava. The mission of the Georgian Energy Development Fund is to promote the realization of Georgia's energy potential and the effort to secure funding. Money is so important. You search for renewable energy projects that have potential and promote their development. As an expert in the field of project development, what would you say? How important is it to include stakeholders such as communities and the youth in this process? And can you perhaps give a very brief example from community-based renewable energy projects in Georgia?
First of all, thank you very much for organizers for giving us a unique opportunity to meet each other, share our experiences and our ideas. Thank you for a question. We are developing projects in Georgia till 2012. And the main lesson which we learned is that you have to start right communication strategy for every project. It does not it's 1 megawatt, 2 megawatt, or 100 megawatt. For each project, you have to start right communication strategy, and it includes communication with communities and communication with youth generation, because we are trying to communicate with them in two directions. First of all, we are trying to raise awareness, because unfortunately in rural areas of Georgia, there is not very high educational level, and for locals, we have good news that in Georgia, like 99% of villages are electrified, but unfortunately, they do not know the logic behind how the electricity is distributed to their homes. For them, it's easy just to click on and turn electricity on, but we are trying to explain how it works, starting from generation, then there is transmission, there is distribution, and every of this process needs investment, needs maintenance, and we are doing our best to explain this process for all of them. The first one is this direction, and another is to show them that there is a very big room for growth for youth generation in this direction. There are many professionals that are needed in this direction, and unfortunately in Georgia we have lack of them. We are trying to highlight that if they do good in school, then they will study in university for these specific professionals. They will have big opportunities to be involved in the process in Georgia for development of especially renewable energy projects. So this is the two main directions in which our communication strategical team is involved, and it's very good that these problems are solved jointly with government, with private sector, and with all stakeholders, because all of them see that right communication with youth and right communication with communities that are part of project area is a very crucial part of project development. Nowadays, we are developing one of the biggest solar power plant in Georgia, utility-scale solar power plant. It's 96 megawatt, and we started communication with locals, with communities, before we started investing in project development, because we had several meetings. We had not only physical meetings, we are trying to bring them to another projects to show them how it works, and we are doing our best to involve them in the process, because at the end of the day, we are developers, we are developing projects, but locals are living in the area near the project, so they must know how it works, and they must be sure that this project will be beneficial for them. So we are doing it from the very beginning, and then when we know that they are ready and their awareness is raised, we are then starting to invest in a project and start other project investment activities.
Thank you very much. You talked a lot about project development and, of course, project development, planning, implementation. I want to move to the panelist to your left to talk a little bit more about displaced communities. One key claim that Christina Simonetti-Techart of UNITAR, of the Global Platform for Action, is to ensure priority involvement of displaced people, host communities, and host governments from planning to implementation. Is there an ideal way, and I have to ask you to be brief to make sure we have time for questions later on, maybe a minute and a half, an ideal way to involve stakeholders in this process from planning to implementation?
Okay, so I'll try to be as brief as possible. I'm always recalling when we talk about inclusion of displaced people in all the processes. First of all, like the disability movement in the 90s when they said nothing without us, nothing about us without us. And I think like this is something I think we should bring into the development work, humanitarian work, but also energy planning. Like we cannot do energy planning, I mean, in displaced settings, but also elsewhere without being inclusive. And the first reason for this is that if you don't do that, you're gonna like develop the wrong solutions. Like we still have we see a lot of projects, for example, in clean cooking, where we see like the support of some cook stoves in some countries, in areas where actually like these stoves don't like support the cooking traditions of the people, so they can't use them. So it sounds like impossible, but it's still happening.
I do love this idea of nothing about us without us. I want to jump in here because we did have a very exciting moment yesterday during a panel about cooking and how important it is. Cooking is a huge source globally of emissions, and we have to include these communities. I want to move on to the panelists next to you. Saga Williams, to talk a little bit about nothing about us without us. What would you wish for when it comes to how Canadian policy involves Indigenous communities? And I apologize that I have to ask you to be brief in your response.
Well, the good news is I will be here for the next 2 days, and I have lots of information with me and lots of takeaways. So please come and approach me and my colleagues here. But I think when you ask the question about what needs to be done more at a policy level, I think, as I mentioned before, we are transitioning to a place where capacity is being built for Indigenous peoples to participate in the discussion around the regulatory regime that guides the development of resource projects in our country. We are part of the conversation, and it's organizations like the First Nations Major Project Coalition that helps to build that capacity and helps to bring in the traditional knowledge from our knowledge holders in our communities and into a context that allows for that information to transition into a regulatory process. So the protection of the environment is really key for our communities. It's key for our organizations, but not leaving behind our communities in relation to resource development. It doesn't mean that we are sacrificing the well-being of our communities in terms of the participation from an economic perspective of resource development in our country. We're a very resource-rich area, and our communities live in those areas where mining is happening, where hydro development is happening, where hydrogen development is happening. So we need to be a part of those conversations. And Christina, the conversation that you had around displacement, we are displaced people within our own territories, and we've been put on very small tracts of land implemented through the reserve systems, but we have intimate knowledge of the vast territories that we're from, and we are able to bring that into conversations around resource development, and around protection of sacred sites, and around protection of environmentally sensitive sites. So when you talk about what needs to happen, I would say that we are being involved in the regulatory and policy regimes where resource development is happening, and it's a really important place for our communities to be. So thank you for the opportunity to say that and to be part of this delegation.
Thank you so much, Saga Williams. Your Excellency, I'd like to turn to you next from Kosovo. The Ministry of Economy and the Ministry of Environment for Spatial Planning and Infrastructure, together with the UNDP Kosovo, have taken action to design energy efficiency policies. We were just talking about policy and measures, the circular economy roadmap, and you've also developed thematic policy briefs in the climate sector. Unfortunately, I have to ask you very briefly to tell us a little bit about these policies and measures.
Yes. To keep it brief, I'd like to focus on the energy efficiency one, because Kosovo has a very high energy intensity. So compared to our, compared to our GDP, we consume over 3 times as much as the EU countries on average do. So addressing energy efficiency, increasing energy efficiency is a key part to decarbonizing our energy sector. So for this, we are designing a new building code, which will mean that buildings that are built from now on will be much more efficient and reduce the need for energy consumption and generation. We're also working on eco-labeling and increasing awareness about efficiency. One of the initiatives that we have recently undertaken and that has had a great effect in this respect was a subsidy for heating appliances, efficient heating appliances, which, apart from its direct effect, where we reached over 9,000 families with 5 million euros of subsidies, we've seen that it's created a lot of buzz. People are talking about energy coefficients, are talking about energy labels, and companies have started marketing their products as efficient, which is also helping to raise awareness and inform consumers. So in the same vein, in combination with new regulations, but also subsidies for efficient equipment, we are hoping to have a significant effect and impact actually beyond the measures in improving energy efficiency. And this is one of the most exciting things that we are doing.
Thank you so much for sharing, Your Excellency. Rana Adib, to close out this last round, I'll ask you briefly. REN 21 is really is very active within the energy community in pooling knowledge, but I want to know what you think. I'm talking to you now, not to REN 21. What does good vulnerable community and youth involvement look like in a minute?
Okay, in a minute, I'm going to build on the nothing about us without us, because I think this is a fundamental challenge we have also. It means that the people who need to be part of the discussion, and we have a diversity of people who need to be part of the discussion, have also the climate literacy and the energy literacy to be able to participate in this discussion that are partly really technical, legal, political, require a lot of expertise, decisions, etc. It also means that we have a different focus when we look at the energy transition. I think we heard it here on the panel with the diversity of voices. And I think this, for me, as a cultural hybrid, often something I realize 2 languages are not the same and the cultural part is not the same. And I think that is something which we need as climate players, as renewable energy players, to really integrate in a much better way. So to be able to involve those different decision makers really means to start thinking and telling the renewable energy story in a different way. So when you obviously, when you speak about energy security globally and you go to African players, they say like, okay, great, we speak about energy security in the global north, but for us, energy security is energy access. And it's completely correct to say this. Ultimately, it comes down to the same topic. It is about access to sustainable energy supply. And I think this is one part. The other part is also that and I think that's something to really see. As the energy consumers, we need to, the different energy consumers, we have a different view on this, but also the policy makers. So whether you're sitting in the transport ministry or in the energy ministry or the agricultural ministry, you will look at energy in a different way. And you're actually responsible for a political agenda or an investment that is linked to providing good healthcare, providing a sustainable agriculture, etc. Energy is always a key, it has a key role, is enabling here. But if we come and say like, oh, those solar PV panels and wind blades are so cool, and you should really think about them, they're not going to jump on it. So we need to basically change our narrative. And I think this is really something which I feel is fundamental on this part where there is so much good practice is let's share this good practice. But then also you said like the best thing parents can do to give basically to their kids is a green planet. I think it's a green planet, but it's also education. And here I really think that when you think about the fact that Italy, I think, was like 3 years ago, the first European country that included climate as a mandatory topic in the educational program, that's basically crazy.
My son goes to third grade here in Berlin, and we had to buy an extra, it wasn't provided by the school, we had to buy an extra notebook that is all focused about climate change and energy and sort of the world that he will be facing, that we will be facing, but that he will be facing. And I think that's, I mean, it's great that they're starting in third grade, but it shouldn't be that I have to buy it. It should be compulsory. This should just be a part of the regular curriculum. We only have 7 minutes left on our panel, and I want to make sure that we each have about 20 seconds to close things. So I think I want to see, is there anyone in the audience that has a question, a brief question for any of our panelists here or in the audience? Or do any of you have a question for one another? Do we have a question? I don't see. Oh, yes, please. Linda will bring you a microphone. I'll have to ask you in the interest of everyone here to keep your question concise and short.
I will try to keep my question concise and short, thank you. My name is Jonas Heid. I represent industrial energy consumers in Germany. So I suppose in some ways the enemy. I think to summarize the questions, perhaps one should say it's just a lot more complicated perhaps than it's been made out to seem on this panel so far. And I think there's 3 key points that I think you should perhaps bear in mind.
I'm not sure we have time. I'm so sorry to interrupt you. I'm not sure we have time for 3.
I'll be super fast.
Thanks.
Industry is moving as fast as it can, but it's slow by nature. Politics is trying its best, but it's very often firing the wrong way, very much accidentally. And nature protection and climate protection often go against each other. I'd be happy to discuss these points later. Thank you very much.
Was there a question? No. Oh. Please, Rana.
May I quickly? I would agree, and I think this is basically something that is, again, when we look from the different perspectives, and all aspects and agendas of this are right, and basically will come to other decisions depending on that. And I think this is basically a part which is the big challenge, in addition to the educational, is how do you create the spaces that we can have not only polarized discussion, but identify the common ground of understanding that really allows us to move forward. And here I also think if you ask on the citizens' involvement on the different voices, policymakers can create the spaces in their tendering processes to ensure that citizens do support this. If we don't have citizen support, the reality is that transition is not going to happen because there will be a pushback and then NIMBY and delayed permitting processes, etc., and no inclusion. So I think it is how do we identify, and that's not comfortable because we need to get out of our comfort zones, but we are able, I think we are so many smart people on this planet, to create new formats where it is not only about power games, but where it is about a real dialogue and listening to each other and trying to find joint solutions.
A real dialogue and listening to each other is fantastic. It's a really, really fantastic closing thought, which can lead us into closing thoughts from everyone else. Your Excellency, I'd like to ask you briefly for a final word on the idea of youth and community involvement, pooling knowledge. If you can keep it to 30 seconds, that'd be fantastic.
Well, that's a tough one. If I had to summarize, I guess I would say that from these 2 years in government, something that I have learned is that it is extremely important for everyone to be heard. And not all ideas that come are implementable. Not even all of them are smart, I have to say. However, among them, some of them can be really useful, particularly when they come from experts, when they come from private sector, from people who really have devoted their lives to either analysis or applications. So it's really important for us as policymakers to listen to all of these voices and to identify the ones that are actually feasible, because not all of them them are. And this way, I think we can ensure that we don't make the accidentally wrong decisions that someone mentioned.
I think that listening to one another is important. I'd like to now listen to Lisi Priya. Do you have a brief closing statement for us today?
Yeah, I would just like to tell to everyone that we are unstoppable, another world is possible, and change is possible. So we must keep fighting until we achieve our goals.
Thank you very much, Lisi Priya. Oh. Nugzar Khandrava, do you have a brief closing statement for us?
Yes, I want to one more time highlight that raising awareness is one of the main direction to solve these problems. And also, I want to fully agree with my colleagues that we have to start from education in schools, education in universities, about the renewable energy, about the climate changes. And as soon as our younger generation will fully understand the problem and fully understand, will see the ways how to solve it, then it will be their demand to politicians and to other parts of communities to start changes. So I think that this is the main direction, to invest in education.
Thank you very much. Investing in education, extremely important. Christina Simonetti-Techart, a final closing word.
Okay, my final closing word would be, let's not reinvent the wheel. We have resources. Let's include displaced people into existing energy planning and energy programs, and also financing possibilities and methods. And let's keep on talking with the private sector, because there is a real business case out there, and it's not true that it doesn't make sense to keep those people on board. So let's not leave anyone behind.
I think that's great. Let's not leave anyone behind. Saga Williams, a final closing word.
My closing thoughts are that we need to include Indigenous perspectives in a framework for resource development and energy development. We need to include those perspectives because they're the ones that are most impacted in terms of being on the land and knowing the land, that we have to protect those land-based teachings, and we have to incorporate them into a regime of decision-making within our countries. I think we also have to provide the resources for them to participate in these conversations, but participate also in project development from an equity perspective.
Thank you very much. I want to make sure that we also ask our two voices in the audience today. You're welcome to stand. You're also welcome to join us up on stage. We're going to get a picture with you anyhow later on. Elizabeth Wathuti, do you have a final closing statement? Come on up on stage. Here, take my chair. Mitzi, come on stage as well. You're a part of this panel too. Please, Elizabeth, a closing statement. Have a seat. You can stand by me.
My closing statement is we have to connect everything we're doing and connect ourselves with the realities on the ground, because we are not lacking information, science, or policies. What we are lacking is urgency. And for us to change everything, we are going to need everyone to be on board. Thank you.
That's right. We're going to need everybody on board. Thank you so much, Elizabeth. You get the final word, Mitzi.
The industry doesn't have to be slow. Human beings are capable of amazing things once we understand that there is an emergency, that there is a crisis, and this is a crisis, and this is an emergency, so we need to act fast. To say that we cannot do more, that this is the fate that we have, is to ignore the lives of billions of people across the world. So the challenge is, are you capable of doing better? Because I know you can.
Thank you so much, Mitzi. Thank you so much to all of my panelists. Mitzi Tan, Elizabeth Wathuti, Artane Rizvanoli from Kosovo, Lisi Priya Kangujam, Rana Adib, Nugzar Khandrava, Christine Simonetti-Techart, and Saga Williams. A round of applause, everyone, for this panel on pooling knowledge, community, and youth involvement.